In the early years of the Second World War, when Britain stood virtually alone against Nazi Germany, a little-known branch of its wartime intelligence machine began to operate in absolute secrecy. The Special Operations Executive, created by Churchill in July 1940 with the terse directive to set Europe ablaze, became the most shadowy arm of British covert warfare. Its agents, often moving alone into hostile territory, carried radios no larger than a suitcase, cyanide pills hidden in coat seams, and identities that could never be acknowledged if compromised. Few outside a handful of senior officials even knew their names, and even fewer understood the full danger they faced. The challenge confronting the SOE in 1941 and 1942 was monumental. Build underground resistance networks across Nazi-occupied Europe while the Wehrmacht maintained total control over railways, communication lines, postal systems, and civilian life. The SOE's French section, known as F Section, rapidly recruited operatives with language fluency, nerves of steel, and the ability to disappear into the urban sprawl of Paris or the dense forests of the Loire Valley. Other branches inserted agents into the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, and Norway, each region presenting unique threats. In the Netherlands, for example, the German security services had established some of the most sophisticated counterintelligence units in Europe, led by veterans of the Abwehr and SD. For agents landing there, survival often depended on minutes. From the outset, the work was fraught with danger. Every operative parachuted into the continent faced the same chilling uncertainty. If captured, they had no uniform to protect them under the Geneva Convention. They carried forged identity cards, maps printed on silk, and radio crystals hidden in toothbrush handles. Captured SOE agents were routinely classified as spies and subject to interrogation, torture, and execution under Hitler's infamous Commando Order, issued in October 1942. London knew these risks, yet operations intensified. The supply of trained agents never seemed enough for the growing needs of the resistance. Field diaries give an intimate window into these dangers. One entry from an SOE courier in France, dated May 1942, reads simply, "No safe houses tonight. Patrols everywhere. Heard there have been arrests in the next sector. Something feels wrong." Another agent, operating near Rouen, sent a final radio message that London recorded but never heard from again. "Wireless conditions bad. Cannot remain here." These brief communications capture the constant fear agents lived with. Every knock at a door, every unfamiliar face in the street, carried deadly potential. And yet, by 1942, agents began disappearing at a rate that alarmed even seasoned case officers in London. Some losses were expected. None of this work could be done safely or cleanly. But the pattern soon became impossible to ignore. Skilled wireless operators, field couriers, and sabotage specialists were vanishing within days or weeks of landing. Missions went silent without explanation. Radios that were normally active fell dark. And in several regions, the frequency of disappearances suggested something more insidious than routine capture. At SOE headquarters on Baker Street, a series of internal memoranda circulated between section heads and senior officers. One note, preserved in post-war archives, warned, "Communications from the field increasingly unreliable. Assess possibility of compromised networks." Another, less formal but far more chilling, reads, "We may be losing agents before they reach first contact. Investigate leaks." Yet no one could determine whether the cause was German efficiency, operational errors, or something deeper, perhaps betrayal from within. The uncertainty weighed heavily. The SOE's mission demanded continuous action, even in the face of mounting losses. Parachute flights continued from Tempsford Airfield, the hub of clandestine insertions, each operation launched under the cover of night. Lysander aircraft skimmed dangerously low over occupied fields to extract or deliver personnel. But enthusiasm among agents dimmed as rumors spread of colleagues who vanished without a trace. Some questioned whether London truly understood the scale of the threat emerging in occupied Europe. What makes these early disappearances so haunting is not simply the danger inherent to clandestine warfare, it is the unanswered nature of the losses. Unlike conventional soldiers, SOE operatives did not fall in known battles or leave graves behind. Many left only a final Morse transmission, a coded message scribbled in a ledger, or a name typed on a deployment order. Their families received no details and in numerous cases, no confirmation of death. Even after the war, inquiries returned little more than speculation. The mystery surrounding these vanished operatives, particularly in the Netherlands, the Loire, and northern France, set the stage for later crises that would shake the SOE to its core. As historians later discovered, signs of infiltration and German counterintelligence breakthroughs had already begun to surface in 1942. But at the time, with Europe under the iron grip of the Nazi occupation, those warnings remained faint, overshadowed by the relentless pace of covert operations. As Part 1 closes, one truth becomes clear. Before the war reached its turning point, the SOE was already fighting a hidden battle it barely understood, one where each lost agent deepened the shadows surrounding Britain's covert war. And soon those shadows would grow even darker. By mid-1943, the shadow war unfolding in the occupied Netherlands had taken a sinister turn, one that British intelligence would only fully grasp far too late. The WWII, Germany's military intelligence service, had mastered a devastating weapon in its duel with the SOE, the Funkspiel, or radio game. Using captured British radios, German operators began transmitting signals back to London, skillfully imitating the style, timing, and even the subtle mistakes of authentic SOE wireless agents. At first, the deception was so precise that SOE handlers believed their networks were expanding. In reality, the enemy was mapping every insertion, every supply drop, every agent sent to support what Britain believed was a growing Dutch resistance. The origins of this unfolding disaster can be traced to early 1942, when several SOE operatives, including the skilled wireless operator Hub Lauwers, were captured shortly after landing. Lauwers had been trained in code discipline, specifically instructed to include a personal, duress signal, if forced to transmit under enemy control. But under intense interrogation and the threat of execution, he was compelled to send messages without this signal. The absence of the security check should have alerted London immediately. Yet the pressure to maintain contact with Dutch resistance groups, coupled with internal miscommunication, allowed the warning to slip through the cracks. What followed was one of the most successful counterintelligence operations executed by Nazi Germany. On paper, signals traffic looked promising. London believed fresh networks in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and The Hague were flourishing. More agents were prepared for deployment. More weapons containers were assembled for nightly airdrops. Yet these were being collected by German teams posing as resistance fighters, while newly arrived SOE operatives were awaited at drop zones not by allies, but by arrest squads from the Sicherheitsdienst. Frustration in London. Inside Baker Street, doubts began to form among a handful of experienced case officers. Some questioned why Dutch circuits were requesting unusually large shipments of weapons. Others noted the radio messages lacked the familiar quirks of their operators' phrasing. But in the bureaucratic pressure cooker of wartime intelligence, raising such objections risked being seen as obstructive. SOE's mission was expansion, and the Dutch section needed successes to justify continued funding and airtime. Still, concerns circulated in memoranda. One classified note from early 1943 reads, "Traffic irregularities significant. Consider possibility of hostile control." Another, from a communications officer, warned, "Operators removed personal cadence. Check authenticity." But every time doubts arose, a new message from the field seemed to reassure command. It was all part of the WWII's method. Provide just enough credible information to maintain trust while manipulating British strategy. The human cost. The most tragic element of the Funkspiel was the fate of the agents sent into the trap. Good men and women parachuted over Dutch farmland believing they would meet allies. Instead, they walked into carefully staged ambushes. Some were captured within minutes of touching the ground. Others survived mere days before arrests swept through supposed safe houses. One entry from a post-war interrogation report describes how German agents would even use bicycles, iconic in Dutch cities, to shadow newly arrived operatives, blending seamlessly into local crowds. It was a counterintelligence environment where survival required near-superhuman instincts. Among the vanished operatives was Noor Inayat Khan, the first female wireless operator sent into France for SOE's F section, whose disappearance later became emblematic of the chaos spreading across European networks. Though Noor operated in France, London's growing fear of compromised wireless traffic deeply affected her mission. She repeatedly warned London that her circuit was collapsing around her, but confusion over which networks were safe and which were infiltrated made coordination increasingly perilous. Her later capture only deepened the mystery surrounding Germany's widening intelligence net. A fraying web. As 1943 progressed, signs of network collapse grew unmistakable, but not uniformly acknowledged. Some officers noted that Dutch circuits were seemingly incapable of sabotage action despite massive supply drops. Others warned that messages were becoming overly formal, lacking the hurried, clipped character of operators transmitting under threat of detection. Yet bureaucracy and hope can be powerful blinders. Many in London still clung to the belief that resistance groups were simply being cautious, waiting for strategic moments to act. After all, other regions of Europe were teeming with successful sabotage efforts, especially France and Yugoslavia. Why would the Netherlands be any different? The reveal. The truth hit only when it was too late. In late 1943, intercepted German messages and captured documents began to point toward an elaborate deception. By the time London confirmed that nearly every Dutch agent had been captured, dozens had already vanished into German prisons, transit camps, or interrogation centers like Heeren and Mauthausen. The weapons and supplies intended for Dutch patriots now sat in German depots, photographed as trophies in internal abwehr files. The SOE's Dutch section would later call this period the catastrophe, a systemic failure that cost countless operatives their lives and crippled resistance efforts for months. And yet, despite the scale of the disaster, many of the captured agents left no surviving prison records. Some were listed as transferred. Others simply disappeared. Closing suspense. The Funkspiel exposed a vulnerability at the core of covert warfare. In a world ruled by secrecy, trust can be both a lifeline and a weapon. With networks collapsing and agents vanishing across multiple regions, not just the Netherlands, British intelligence faced a haunting question. If Germany had mastered this level of deception in one country, how many other SOE circuits might already be under hostile control? That unanswered question would lead directly into the next and most devastating crisis of the war, the fall of the Prosper network in France. In the summer of 1943, a single name began to dominate British intelligence briefings with an almost ominous heaviness: Prosper. To the outside world it was meaningless. But within SOE's French section, Prosper, officially known as the Physician Network, after its leader Francis Suttel's code name, had become the backbone of Britain's covert war in occupied France. Built with extraordinary speed and ambition, the network stretched from Paris to the Loire Valley, linking dozens of subcircuits, safe houses, couriers, and sabotage teams. At its peak, London believed it was the most successful resistance structure operating anywhere in Europe. Yet in early June 1943, Prosper began to crumble, and within weeks, it would collapse entirely, becoming one of the greatest disasters in the history of British clandestine operations. Overnight, agents disappeared. Sabotage units went silent. Couriers failed to report. And a wave of arrests rolled through Paris with such precision that many suspected betrayal from within. The rise of Prosper. The network's rapid rise was a marvel of clandestine organization. Major Francis Suttel, an intelligent, disciplined officer trained at SOE's Beaulieu estate, was parachuted into France in October 1942. His mission: unite scattered resistance groups, prepare sabotage plans for a future Allied invasion, and coordinate supply drops from RAF Temsford's clandestine flights. Within months, he and his deputy, André Borel, built a sprawling network of fighters, safe houses, and wireless links, centered primarily in Paris. Wireless operators such as Gilbert Norman and Jack Agazarian transmitted steadily, ensuring London had consistent situational updates. By spring 1943, the network had organized multiple sabotage teams capable of crippling factories, rail lines, and German troop movements. For SOE, Prosper became a symbol of what clandestine warfare could achieve. But its size, its very success, contained the seeds of catastrophe. A network too large. Historian M.R.D. Foote would later note that Prosper's downfall stemmed partly from scale. In intelligence work, the larger the network, the greater the risk of infiltration. Prosper's operatives used safe houses clustered too closely in Paris. Couriers carried messages along predictable routes. Meetings were held too frequently. And as the network grew, the pressure from London intensified. More sabotage, more coordination, more preparations for an invasion France did not yet know was delayed. This pressure created openings the Germans swiftly exploited. Signs of trouble. By May 1943, subtle signs indicated danger. Agents reported increased Gestapo field patrols near known safe houses. Couriers mentioned unfamiliar faces on trains between Paris and Tours. One resistance member warned that a German officer had been asking questions specifically about British parachutists. London, however, was receiving mixed signals. Prosper's wireless traffic remained strong. Requests for supplies persisted. Nothing in the radio messages suggested imminent collapse. But something was deeply wrong. The raid. In early June, the Gestapo launched coordinated raids across Paris and the surrounding region. These operations were built on intelligence gathered over months, some from informants, some from intercepted communications, and possibly some from captured agents forced to talk under interrogation at 84 Avenue Foch, the notorious Gestapo headquarters. Major Suttel was arrested first, along with key figures of the Paris command. Within days, dozens of couriers and wireless operators followed. The Germans moved with startling precision, striking safe houses in the exact sequence that would cause maximum disruption. Many agents vanished into the system without leaving records, some taken to Fraynes prison, others to Gestapo interrogation centers. For many, their fate would not be discovered until after the war. A single unanswered question. Even today, historians remain uncertain. How did the Germans acquire such detailed knowledge of the network? Several theories persist. Captured radios and forced transmissions. Like the Dutch Funkspiel, Germans may have used compromised radios to manipulate London. A double agent within the French resistance. Evidence suggests a possible source within Paris provided key details. Operational errors. Prosper's rapid expansion created vulnerabilities, patterns in safe house use, predictable drop sites, centralized meetings. A misinterpretation in London. Some forewarnings may have been dismissed as routine field anxieties. Whatever the cause, the consequence was clear. Prosper was destroyed. The human cost. Those who vanished during the raids left behind few traces. Wireless operators like Gilbert Norman, who allegedly sent messages missing his security checks, became a central mystery. Was he transmitting under duress? Or attempting to warn London? The debate continues to this day. André Borel, Prosper's deputy and one of SOE's most skilled agents, was later executed, though her exact path from arrest to death remains partly obscured by incomplete German records. Meanwhile, as prisoners were moved deeper into the Reich, London struggled to comprehend the scale of the loss. A classified SOE report stated bluntly, "We have no further contact with the physician circuit." Assume compromise. A modern reflection. Prosper's fall demonstrates the fragility of intelligence operations. One mistake, one courier followed, one radio intercepted, can cascade into system-wide failure. The tragedy underscores how even highly trained operatives were vulnerable in a surveillance state as extensive as Nazi-occupied France. Closing suspense. Yet even as evidence mounted that Prosper had fallen, not all wireless traffic ceased. Some signals continued, claiming to represent remnants of the network. Were they survivors attempting to reconnect, or Germans exploiting captured equipment? This uncertainty would push British intelligence into one of its most desperate periods of the war, raising questions that still echo through the archives. If Prosper had been compromised so completely, what other networks were already unraveling in silence? The answer would begin to emerge only as D-Day approached, and more agents vanished without explanation. In the months leading up to D-Day, an eerie pattern crept across occupied Europe, one that British intelligence could neither ignore nor fully explain. Agents from multiple SOE and MI6 circuits were vanishing at a rate that defied wartime norms. Not just in France, but in Belgium, Denmark, and especially the regions of Normandy and Brittany where Allied planners expected resistance networks to be strongest. The mystery behind these disappearances began with isolated incidents. A wireless operator who failed to report, a courier who missed a rendezvous, a sabotage team that simply never returned. But by the spring of 1944, these isolated cases formed a wider, more troubling mosaic. The Allied High Command had placed immense weight on clandestine efforts ahead of the invasion. Resistance groups were expected to disrupt rail lines, destroy bridges, and cripple German reinforcements. SOE networks like jockey, salesmen, and scientists were designated as critical assets. Yet these very circuits began to weaken just as their importance reached its peak. In Brittany, agents reported meeting German patrols in areas previously considered clean. In Normandy, known safe houses were raided with suspicious precision, as if patrols had prior knowledge of the locations. It became increasingly clear that German counterintelligence units were shifting their tactics, not merely reacting to sabotage, but preemptively hunting agents. The key difference in 1944 was the emergence of specialized German counter-sabotage teams created to suppress the growing threat of Allied coordinated uprisings. The Sicherheitspolizei (SIPO) and Sicherheitsdienst (SD) expanded their presence near ports, rail hubs, and industrial centers. In addition, elite anti-partisan units formed under the command of the Wehrmacht and SS, such as the notorious Jagdkommando patrols, trained specifically to detect clandestine activity. They patrolled rural areas at night, listening for clandestine radio transmissions, watching for unusual light signals, and intercepting travelers on footpaths long used by resistance couriers. One SOE report from early 1944, later declassified, noted, enemy patrols demonstrate advanced familiarity with rural infiltration routes. Agents advise extreme caution. Another field note stated, increased arrests in Sark region. Suspect compromised safehouse network. No confirmation. These fragments show a growing awareness of danger, but not the full scale of what was unfolding. The Germans were no longer reacting, they were anticipating. Wireless operators were among the most vulnerable. Transmissions had to be short, ideally under 20 minutes, to avoid detection by German radio direction-finding units. Yet as the need for rapid coordination escalated, operators faced immense pressure to send longer, more frequent messages. A single misjudgment could lead direction-finding trucks to triangulate their position. Many operators took the fatal risk out of loyalty to their circuits in desperation to support the looming Allied invasion. One such operator, working in northern France, sent a final message to London. Urgent, cannot remain here. Patrols close. Will attempt alternate site. No further transmission was ever received. Another agent, a courier in Brittany, wrote in a pocket diary recovered after the war, feels as though they know our paths. Nothing is safe. That line, scribbled hastily in pencil, has since become emblematic of the pressure resistance networks faced. An emerging theory within MI6's Section 5 suggested that some networks were compromised through captured couriers who revealed contact points under interrogation. Another possibility was that increased traffic from the buildup to D-Day made Allied patterns more detectable. Yet an uncomfortable question lingered in internal reports. Were some German successes aided by deception operations similar to the Dutch Funkspiel? No smoking gun was ever found, but several transmissions in early 1944 exhibited subtle anomalies, timing irregularities, missing security checks, or unfamiliar phrasing. London could not definitively conclude whether these were signs of duress or simply the strain on operators working under impossible conditions. The liberation of France would later reveal that many captured agents passed through a labyrinth of German facilities, transit prisons, Gestapo interrogation centers, and camps designed specifically for political prisoners. But in 1944, their fates remained unknown. Some were believed captured at checkpoints where German police inspected rail documents. Others vanished after attending scheduled meetings that had clearly been compromised. The lack of surviving records for many detainees, destroyed in the final months of the war, only deepened the post-war mystery. As D-Day drew closer, Allied planners grew increasingly anxious. They needed reliable resistance networks to orchestrate sabotage and support airborne troops in the opening hours of the invasion. Yet in several regions, the exact strength and integrity of these networks had become impossible to verify. A senior SOE liaison officer wrote, "We are operating in fog. Some circuits strong, others silent. Assessments uncertain." The final weeks before June 6 only intensified the uncertainty. Reports of missing agents continued. Attempts to re-establish contact with vanished operatives failed. And though the Allies prepared to land the largest amphibious force in history, they did so with a haunting knowledge. Parts of the resistance structure expected to support them might already be hollowed out. Closing suspense. In the fog of clandestine warfare, truth often emerges only slowly and sometimes not at all. The growing disappearance of agents in early 1944 left a legacy of questions. Was it German efficiency? Bad luck? Betrayal? Or a combination too intertwined to unravel? These unanswered doubts would only deepen as the Allies advanced, uncovering fragments of captured documents and abandoned prisons. But many names were missing from every list. And as liberation swept across France, investigators realized that the mystery of the vanished agents was only beginning. When Allied troops swept across France in the late summer of 1944, they expected victory to bring clarity, records uncovered, prisoners liberated, and long-silent agents accounted for. Instead, the fall of Nazi control revealed only fragments of truth, scattered across abandoned Gestapo offices, burned prison files, and testimonies from survivors who emerged emaciated and barely alive. The deeper investigators dug, the more unsettling the pattern became. Many missing British agents simply did not appear anywhere. Not in camp manifests. Not in interrogation logs. Not even in lists of executed prisoners. It was as if entire groups had vanished into blank spaces of the Reich's bureaucracy. In the weeks after Paris was liberated in August 1944, Allied intelligence units, particularly the MI6 War Crimes Investigation Team and newly formed SOE inquiry groups, began combing through Gestapo facilities. At 84 Avenue Foch, the headquarters of the Sicherheitspolizei in Paris, British officers found scattered papers that hinted at the fates of certain captured operatives. Handwritten interrogator notes referenced English radio operators, parachutists, and women couriers. One chilling entry mentioned a female spy refused cooperation to be transferred, likely referring to an SOE agent later confirmed executed at Natzweiler-Struthof. But these documents were only partial clues. Whole file cabinets had been emptied or set on fire in the final days of occupation. Some rooms bore scorch marks from makeshift burn pits. It became clear that the retreating Gestapo had systematically destroyed evidence, not only to conceal atrocities, but to ensure that no single narrative of their operations could ever be easily reconstructed. Investigators shifted their focus to concentration camps newly liberated by Allied forces. Reports from places such as Ravensbrück, Dachau, Buchenwald, and Natzweiler-Struthof began filtering back to London. Some survivors provided first-hand accounts of SOE agents they had seen or heard about. A Polish prisoner at Ravensbrück described a group of foreign women brought in 1944, one of whom matched the description of an SOE wireless operator. At Buchenwald, an underground prisoner committee claimed that a group of male special prisoners had been executed by the SS in October 1944, men believed by some historians to include captured SOE operatives. Yet the records were incomplete, often deliberately falsified. SS administrators routinely assigned political prisoners fake identities or recorded them as unknown. In some cases they were never registered at all. A British liaison officer at the liberation of Natzweiler wrote, "Many incoming prisoners were not logged. Executions occurred off-record, often at night. Documentation minimal. This absence created a haunting vacuum for families desperately seeking answers." Among the most prominent missing cases were agents from the Prosper Network and earlier Dutch and Belgian circuits. Despite extensive searches, some of their names never appeared in any recovered camp logs. Others surfaced only in secondary references, an interrogation memo, a guard's testimony, or a coded signal intercepted late in the war. For several agents, men and women who had once been linchpins of their resistance networks, not even these fragments survived. The Allies also uncovered German files at regional command posts, including Wehrmacht and SS administrative offices. These revealed how meticulously some captured agents were moved through the system. One file from the Cologne region listed a British operative under a false name, noting special prisoner, no correspondence. Another, from the Lutetia Hotel in Paris, referenced interrogations of a British female transmission agent. These breadcrumbs confirmed that many operatives were held under strict secrecy as Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, prisoners, a category designed specifically to make people disappear without a trace. But equally troubling was the sheer number of agents who were not listed anywhere at all. Investigators concluded that many were likely executed immediately after interrogation, actions that required no formal paperwork. Others died during transfers or were killed in reprisals following resistance attacks. Burned transport logs and missing regional reports ensured their trails went cold forever. The weight of these discoveries triggered formal inquiries in London. MI6, SOE, and the War Office each opened internal investigations into missing personnel. Letters were sent to families with cautious, often heartbreaking wording, no definitive information available, presumed deceased, or further inquiry pending. For some families, these letters remained the only official acknowledgement for decades. Yet even amid the devastation, moments of truth surfaced. At Ravensbrück, survivors identified British agent Violette Szabo among those transferred and executed. Testimony from Buchenwald confirmed the execution of several male agents. At Natzweiler, forensic investigation uncovered the site of special prisoner executions, believed to include multiple SOE operatives. These confirmations brought closure, painful yet tangible. But the greater mystery remained unresolved. Why were so many names missing from any record? Some historians argue that German record-keeping was more chaotic than previously believed, especially in the war's final year. Others suggest that certain agents' cases were deliberately hidden by the Nazis to obscure intelligence breaches. A few point to the possibility of post-war secrecy from Allied governments seeking to mask intelligence failures linked to compromised networks. The truth likely contains elements of all three. Closing suspense. By early 1945, British investigators realized they were pursuing ghosts through a shattered landscape of incomplete documents, burned archives, and contradictory testimonies. They had uncovered fragments of truth, but not enough to explain the full scale of the disappearances. As the war approached its end, one question lingered heavily. If some agents had been found through scraps of evidence, how many more were lost forever in the night and fog, their stories still buried in the ruins of the collapsing Reich? Part 6 would attempt to uncover those answers, but even decades later, some mysteries refused to yield. When the war ended in May 1945, victory brought celebration, but within SOE and MI6 headquarters a different atmosphere settled, one of reckoning. Hundreds of names remained unaccounted for, many from networks that had once been the backbone of Allied clandestine operations. The war's end did not answer the most painful questions, it only sharpened them. What happened to the agents who vanished without a trace? Were their disappearances the result of betrayal, miscommunication, or the invisible hand of German deception? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, could some losses have been prevented? In the immediate post-war period, British intelligence launched a series of formal investigations. MI6's Section 9, the SOE Repatriation Department, and the War Crimes Investigation Unit each began piecing together the aftershocks of Europe's clandestine war. Former German officers, Abwehr agents, Gestapo interrogators, and SS administrators were captured and questioned. Some cooperated. Others pretended ignorance or insisted that records had been destroyed under orders from Berlin. "We burned everything," one former Gestapo clerk declared during an interrogation in 1946. "You will find no paper with names." It was a statement both defensive and truthful. Years of systemic destruction had carved voids into the historical record. Against this backdrop, British investigators sifted through what evidence survived. Some clues came from decrypts of wartime German communications, signals intercepted by Bletchley Park and classified until after the war. Others came from testimonies of liberated prisoners who recalled overheard conversations, whispered rumors, or glimpses of foreign captives marched through camp gates. In several cases, these fragments allowed investigators to reconstruct approximate fates. Yet even with these insights, large gaps remained, especially for agents classified by the Nazis as Nacht und Nebel, those meant to disappear entirely. One of the pivotal moments in the post-war inquiries came with the interrogation of German intelligence officers who had overseen radio counterespionage in France and the Netherlands. Some detailed how captured radios were used to mislead London. Others admitted that certain prisoners were executed without documentation, particularly those considered high-value saboteurs or spies linked to Allied command structures. It became clear that Germany's counterintelligence system functioned with both ruthless efficiency and chaotic brutality, capable of meticulous planning one day and haphazard violence the next. Yet not all answers came from German sources. British internal reviews revealed uncomfortable truths about flawed communication protocols, overlooked warnings, and operational pressures that had led to dangerous decisions. In the Dutch Funkspiel case, investigators concluded that London should have recognized the missing security checks earlier. In the Prosper network collapse, post-war reports noted that the circuit had grown too large and too centralized. Even the pre-D-Day disappearances, though largely attributed to German counter-sabotage units, revealed vulnerabilities in Allied courier routes and radio operation procedures. One archived SOE report from 1947 stated bluntly, "It is not possible to attribute all losses solely to enemy action. Operational and procedural lapses contributed." This assessment was not meant to assign blame but to acknowledge the complexity of wartime intelligence, a blend of courage, mistakes, genius, and tragedy. Families of the missing sought answers with urgency. Some traveled to the ruins of camps. Others wrote repeated letters to the Foreign Office. The responses varied. For some, investigators could provide details gathered from camp testimonies, confirming execution dates or locations. For many others, the official reply remained painfully vague. No definitive record has been discovered. The ambiguity weighed heavily on surviving relatives, creating a shadow that lingered long after peace had returned to Europe. As decades passed, historians continued the search. Newly declassified documents, survivor testimonies, and the opening of wartime archives in Germany and France slowly filled in some of the blank spaces. In the 1950s and 1960s, war crimes trials uncovered further information, though often incomplete. The Cold War complicated matters as intelligence agencies worldwide guarded wartime files with renewed secrecy. Not until the 1990s did several key SOE archives become accessible to the public, shedding new light on operational failures and miscommunications. Still, many mysteries endured. Certain wireless operators whose names appear briefly in Gestapo interrogation summaries vanish from all subsequent paperwork. Couriers known to have reached their destinations leave no trace afterward. Some agents believed transferred to camps appear in no prisoner logs. Even today, historians debate why some networks were compromised so quickly while others survived deep into 1944. The most widely accepted explanation is a combination of factors. A German radio deception operations that created false confidence. Captured couriers who revealed routes under torture. Operational consolidation that made networks too visible. Destroyed records that eliminated evidence of prisoners' fates. Post-war intelligence secrecy that obscured certain details. The truth, as modern scholars note, is not a single story but a mosaic, one fractured by war, secrecy, and time. Closing suspense. Today, the names of vanished British agents appear on memorials across Europe, at Ravensbrück, at Brookwood Military Cemetery, at the Valenque Monument to SOEs fallen. Yet for many, the final chapter remains unwritten. Their missions ended in silence, their paths lost in a labyrinth of deception and destruction. And as long as archives remain incomplete and testimonies fade, part of the story will always exist in the shadows. For the wartime investigators who spent years searching for answers, one conclusion became impossible to avoid. In the clandestine world of World War II, truth itself was often the first casualty, and some secrets remain locked in the ruins of history, waiting to be found or destined never to emerge.